So, good morning to everybody. This is the second day of the November weekend retreat, and we're so lucky to have an opportunity like this. I think of retreats as like oases, an oasis in our daily life, in our usual schedule. And particularly for people, living a fairly active life, to take time for a retreat is so valuable, because when we work with the mind, when we give the mind that peace, that stillness, it really changes the way we look at the world and improves the way we look at the world. Is it still sound?
Feedback happening.
Maybe it's from this, do you think? I don't know. Technical. And strangely enough, when we go on retreat, when the mind becomes more peaceful, more still, more aware, more wise. Maybe if we move, can we move further away?
No, the cable is not.
This is life, isn't it? Technical. it's Duke. Yeah, the cable's not that long. I wonder what... I've got a phone here. Should I turn that off? It's not... wouldn't do it. I'm not using it.
That's not the reason.
This is a teaching in itself. There we are. This side. Yeah, is that better? Oh, I think that's...
This doesn't have.
Wow.
This doesn't have feedback suppression, so.
All right.
It's fairly basic.
Fairly basic. I know there's Mr. Sagra has a little one. There's a little mic and a little unit about this size, and you can use it as a speaker. It's fantastic, actually. It's really good. It's tiny, and yet, you put the speaker part of it further back, and it works very well. It's much smaller than this, tiny. I think much better now. There we are. As I was saying, I was just mentioning that it's a strange thing when we go on retreat. We take this time, the mind becomes more peaceful still. There is more wisdom, more insight into our lives. It gives us that perspective. Just as when we take a holiday, we get this sort of, we step out of our usual lives. But with a retreat, we're changing where the mind is coming from. Often with a holiday, you see this quite often, people when they go home, they're actually more tired than when they left because they've been so busy. We're so busy in our ordinary lives, then we go on holiday and we're very busy again. So retreats are not like that, they're an oasis. But the strange thing about retreats, even though, when we're on retreat, where are we looking for happiness? Inside. This is where the source of happiness comes from. We're not looking for it from outside. Retreat is always an internal looking experience. But strangely enough, when the mind settles down, becomes peaceful, and you come out of meditation, everything looks much brighter, much clearer. Sounds are much more, you're more aware of sounds. And the senses are generally much, much more vivid. Why is that? Any thoughts? That's the reason, actually. It's because, isn't it? Because the thinking is reduced, the activity of the mind is reduced, we can give more energy to experiencing the present moment. And the present moment becomes much more vivid, much more bright. The colours, people go outside and say, the sky's so blue, the trees are so green, and this sort of experience. When you have that experience, then you realise, don't you, that it's the mind that is actually adding the beauty, actually constructing our reality. Because the mind can bring beauty or ugliness to anything, depending on where we're coming from. So we have those classic stories, don't we, of Ajahn Brahm? I won't go into his most extreme example. But anyway, when he was in Wat Pa Chat, this was in his very early days as a monk, and he was walking meditation for a long, long time. And after a time, the concrete started the cement, it's just a cement floor, usual cement. And it wasn't even that good, evidently. I think the original one was a bit bumpy and whatnot. But after a time, it started to get beautiful, really, really beautiful. And then the thought occurred to him, it's like a work of art. It's a masterpiece. All the colours and the lines, all the shapes he could see, and everything that he could see in it. So I wonder if we can cut some of this out and send it to the Tate Gallery in London. They can put it in the art gallery. But really, isn't it? It's not the concrete, the cement that's changed. It's the mind. So this is really what we're doing when we come on retreat. This is a real niwadu, a real holiday for the mind. And this is where we can improve, we can change the reality we live in by purifying the mind, by making the mind more clear, coming into the present moment. So this is very, very worthwhile. When we go on holiday, to Thailand or wherever we go on holiday, New Orleans, when we do that, you don't change the mind. The mind hasn't necessarily changed. So the experience we have there will be pretty similar to our normal everyday experience. So really, if people want to change reality, what we need to do is work on our minds, and then we can improve on reality. Because the things that detract from our experience of life, what are they? The defilements, basically. The impurities of the mind. That's basically what gives us grief, what tortures us in daily life, in our lives. So when we purify the mind of some of these kilesas or reduce them, then the experience of the mind is so much more peaceful, so much more happy. Then our experience of the world is so much more peaceful, so much more happy. Because we've let go of a lot of defilements, it improves our experience of the world and it brings that inner peace and inner happiness. But I wasn't going to speak about that today. But first of all, maybe we can start. I always like to, the Buddha recommended that sila was a basis for the bhavana. Sila is a basis actually for our lives and for happiness. As I mentioned yesterday, when we break sila, it's a very good shortcut to suffering, dukkha, to a complicated life, difficulties in our lives. So sila is something that it protects us. It really does protect us and brings happiness and a sense of self-esteem, that we're doing our best. We'll never be perfect, so we don't need to use sila to be hard on ourselves. We do our best with the sila. It is, as the Buddha said, it's a training. Training always implies that we won't be perfect, but it's really the intention to train that is the most important thing, isn't it? That we're trying our best. We're training the mind. Actually, training the mind is more the point. Actually, to refrain from these things, from killing living beings. Whether they be very bothersome or not, like mosquitoes, madaru, they're pretty bothersome. And also not taking things that are not given to us. This is basically stealing. Not indulging in sexual misconduct, which we read about almost daily these days. It's just incredible. And not refraining from, abstaining from, saying no to lying. Now that's more difficult. That's a very tricky area for all of us, actually. And also refraining from taking alcohol and drugs, which, cloud the mind, lead the mind to heedlessness, we say. Pamada, the Buddha calls it, when we're careless, we don't care. We just think, I'm going to do it anyway. You may have an idea of the consequences, but you still, I'll do it. So So now we can take those who would like to, please we'll take the 5 precepts. So we can begin with Sadhu Kien. Namaskarya Kien. Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Sarana-gamanang sampurnam. Anatipata veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Kamesu miccachara veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Sura Meriya Maja Pamadatana veramani sikkhapadam samadhiyami. Tisaranena sanding panchasilang dhammang sadhukang surakitam katva apamadena sampadeta bang. Sadhu, 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 sadhu. So, just so this morning I wanted to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is something I think very important in our lives and very useful in terms of letting go of grudges, letting go of negative mind states that we have. And so it's a very useful thing to do regularly. I call it emptying the rubbish bin in our minds, the kunu in the mind, which accumulates, and our minds can become like a dustbin. It really can, full of rubbish. And so the point of this talk this morning and the guided contemplation on forgiveness later will be how to let go of grudges, how to let go of these negative states of mind. And this, of course, is very much part of the Buddha's teaching. Does everyone know who I am? Do I have to introduce myself? It's on the list here. No? I think everybody knows. Good. So it is a very useful thing to look at. And one of the things that surprised me, I've given this talk a few times, and here in Sri Lanka, and I had this comment twice, I think at least twice, maybe more. Someone said, I always think of forgiveness as a Christian thing. not as a Buddhist thing. I thought, really? Really? Yeah, of course, you know. And then after that, contemplating, I thought, yeah, I suppose, you know, when you think about it, it's big in Christianity, for sure, forgiveness. Because in Christianity is the idea of original sin, isn't it? That we are flawed, which is actually true. We have got these kilesa, these negative qualities. And so, you know, when we ask forgiveness, they're asking forgiveness from God or from Jesus, from an external force, so that, you know, they can be, as it were, purified. And I think that's the idea that perhaps people have of forgiveness, actually, which is really interesting. I never thought of it in that Christian context. But having come from, you know, a Christian background, maybe there is a part of, you know, forgiveness is more prominent in my mind. But it's a very important part of our practice, actually. And so, you know, we need the main thing, who's the main person we need to forgive? Any ideas? Ourselves, number one. Once we do that, everyone else is relatively easy. Because you notice forgiveness, actually, you notice the resentments, the grudges we build up. It's almost, you know, a geographical, you can see a geographical relationship, if you understand what I mean. The closer we are to people, whether it be ourselves, we're pretty close to ourselves, to family, to friends, they are the areas that we generally have more to forgive, more grudges, more resentments in our minds. Further away, the more space there is, the less grudges and resentments we have. Which may be why the Buddha encouraged monks and nuns to live, you know, in kutis apart from each other. Because, as Ajahn Brahm says, when we're close, there's always friction. There's always friction. And that's part of life, actually. What is the friction? It's pretty obvious. It's two sets of kilesa rubbing up against each other. That's what it is, basically. So, and one of I'll just say a few nice quotations about forgiveness. And this one comes from a woman who survived the concentration camps in the Second World War. Her name is Eva Kor, and she said, this is brilliant, I think. We cannot change what happened, but we can change how we relate to it, to the past. Pure Ajahn Brahm, isn't it? Pure Ajahn Brahm. When I read that, I think, has she been reading Ajahn Brahm? She may have come up with it before, actually. And another thing I saw on the internet, and I thought, fantastic, this says it all, really. It says, I don't know who this Dave Willis is, but anyway, this person called Dave Willis has made this saying, holding a grudge doesn't make us strong. Holding a grudge doesn't make you strong. It makes us bitter. Yes? Forgiving doesn't make us weak. It sets us free. That's so true. But it's so hard, isn't it? I mean, it's something that people find very, very difficult, you know, to let go of these grudges, to let go of these resentments. And in a moment I will talk about that, actually, why. So what is forgiveness? Anybody got an idea? Yes? Yeah? Oh, I thought you had some. No, I was going to say forgiveness is an emotion, actually. That's the answer, or a feeling, actually. And basically it's a feeling of letting go, of unburdening ourselves, of past hurts. This is the main thing that we can forgive. These past hurts, what people have said, done, we can forgive. What we have said and done, we can forgive. Often we can't forgive ourselves because we're very close to ourselves. So we can get very disappointed when we fail, when we don't achieve the things that or behave in the way that we think we should. You know, after all, we're Buddhists. You know, maybe we have very high standards. So we can actually be very negative, unforgiving with ourselves. And the essence of the emotions that stop us from forgiving, what are they?
Holding on.
Sorry?
Holding on.
Holding on, for sure, yes. Because you can see it, in Paticca Samuppada in a sense. It's, tanha can be wanting to get, but wanting to get rid of. So can be a negative desire in there. And we can hold on to that, upadana. We can cling on to it. And we do. And I talk about why that is the case. But the main things that fuel the reason we can't forgive is anger. Anger is a biggie. Resentment. These are all pretty synonymous, actually. They're very similar. Bitterness is a very, very strong one. Sadness. And one of the very, very compelling ones is because when we can't forgive, we have a sense of being victimised. We are the victim. These people have done it to us. They've said this. They've done these things and said these things that have made me a victim. And this is where I find it very inspiring when someone who is a concentration camp survivor, they're the classic victim. And yet this woman I just mentioned, Eva Kaur, she refused to be a victim. She worked hard to forgive and free herself from that perception of being a victim, which really keeps people in a state where they can't forgive. It's unforgivable. When you're a victim, it's unforgivable. So as I said, it's really, forgiveness is mental hygiene. It's like emptying the emotional, the mental dustbin, throwing the kunu away. That's not easy. You'd think, well, that's easy. Do you have trouble throwing the rubbish away? Most people don't, In Australia we have these bins with wheels and we call it the wheelie bins. And we take it out every week and put it on the verge and the council comes and they collect the rubbish. And then I say to people in Australia, how often do we take the mental wheelie bin out? We don't. We don't. In fact, we may even treasure some of these hurts, which I'll get on to in a minute. So this difficulty, we have no difficulty emptying the household waste, the rubbish bin that contains all the food scraps and all the leftovers and all this sort of thing, the plastic these days. But why can't we empty the mental or emotional rubbish bin? That's one of the things. Because often there are things that we think, and you hear this, don't you? There are things that are unforgivable. They're unforgivable. Do you think the Buddha would have ever said this? Would he have said, monks, nuns, there are things that are unforgivable, and then mention a list, this for, or whatever? He never did. Because, this is a negative emotion. This is akusala. He's not going to encourage us to be akusala. But there are some things that make it easier for us not to forgive. If it's physical abuse, when people hit each other, we hear of domestic violence a lot, when hitting children or harming children, verbal abuse, this can be almost more destructive, can't it? Because people can take it very personally, especially if you're a child. You hear something over and over again, you're no good, you're not this, you're not that. You take it on board and you may not question it. And of course these days we hear of sexual abuse a lot, don't we? Sexual misconduct in the news all the time. And of course psychological abuse can be a combination of those other things as well. But the main reason, we think there are things that are unforgivable. We just cannot in any way forgive them. In fact, if we do forgive them, it's like we're betraying ourselves. We feel like we are saying yes to the perpetrator of whatever abuse it was. But the main reason we can't forgive is because we feel we're right, don't we? We're in the right, and that person is absolutely in the wrong. Why should I forgive them? They're wrong. And of course, I reflect, often reminds me when I think of that of Ajahn Nissarano. He would say, yes, we can be right, but can be not good. So in other words, yes, even if we're 100% right, it's the emotion, the anger, the resentment, the lack of forgiveness is akusala. It's still not good. There's no way to be good. And in the end, as I say to everybody, who experiences that akusala state of mind first? The person we can't forgive may never know about it. They may not. We do. We experience it. So this is really, the wisdom that comes from this. Is yes, being right is one thing, but it never, never, never justifies akusala states of mind, because we're the first ones to suffer. We have to carry the rubbish bin, the negative emotions with us. We have to experience the results of feelings, depression, sadness, uselessness, hopelessness, because of this rubbish we carry around, the victim mentality we may carry around. So this, whenever I feel I'm right, and often we do, I think, watch out, watch out, because when we're right, it's that we can be so angry. And, we have this saying in English, and maybe you have it in similar to righteous anger. Is there such a thing as righteous anger? The Buddha would say, no, there is no righteous anger. There isn't. And when we realise, even if we are 100% right, being angry, being resentful, holding that grudge is actually hurting us. It may not even hurt the other person one bit. They may not have any idea of it. Then that's an incentive for us to let go. Because this is basically, forgiveness is letting go of those burdens that we have accumulated, those hurts that we've accumulated. So that's an important thing. And I think, if you only take that one away with you, the warning that when we're right, beware, beware, because this is dangerous actually. And also one of the things I see in my own life too, there are times when I thought I'm 100% right, and then later I find, no, I wasn't. So this can be the case. We operate, don't we, on limited information. We can't know everything. And one of the things that helps us actually let go is to remember that maybe there are reasons that this person's doing and saying this totally unacceptable thing. We don't know. But if we have that openness of mind that says, well, I don't have all the information, maybe they've had a terrible day or an argument or something like that, then that enables us to forgive, to let go, or at least, put a question mark and not use the power of being right to really get back at them. But what is the biggest reason we can't let go of this mental and emotional rubbish? Anybody?
Then you feel that it's unfair.
Yes, that's true. I think unfair, that's true. And, that's part of being right in a sense. When we think something's unfair, it's like it's not right. That's how I would see it, actually. But you're quite right. Injustice, and you see this, I remember a Quaker friend of mine, a very elderly one, actually, Mary, said to me many years ago, she said, the most unpeaceful people I ever met in my life were these peace activists. She said they were so angry because, there's a lot of injustice in the world. There is. There's no doubt. Nobody could deny that, I think. And she said, they're so angry. And why is that? Because anger does give energy. It also consumes a lot of energy, actually. But it gives people energy, which is what they buy into. But it's a very destructive energy that burns you, burns others. So that was interesting. And Mary said that these peace activists were the most unpeaceful people. So you're right, being things that are unfair really get us, bring up these negative emotions for sure. And you can see some of that. I mean, I have reservations about it because I don't know if you saw the speech by Greta Thunberg about climate change to the UN, and she was so angry. And I felt, is that a good thing? I thought, well, if she's not really angry underneath, maybe it's good. It just makes people think this is serious. but she seemed pretty angry. And what happens when we've got anger in the mind, we think we're right, there's injustice to be put right. Anger clouds the mind. It actually prevents us from doing what is the most skillful, the best thing at that time. But of course, in that situation, it certainly would have made an impression on me, the viewer. I thought, wow, I don't know about that. But still, because I know she's got a lot of ability, this girl, hasn't she? She's very, when she speaks, when she's not angry, she's very intelligent, logical, and so on. So, yes, I still remember that speech when she started, ... how dare you, and ... how dare you, and then the next thing was, we will not forgive you, and she was really laying it on the line. So I thought, so you're right, injustice is like that. But bigger than injustice, another reason we cannot let go of, absolutely, we've got that in one Kushi, yes, because this kunu, this mental and emotional rubbish is our rubbish. That's why we can't let go of it. If it's other people's rubbish, forget it. Why don't they get rid of it, Because we get attached to our hurts. We get a sense of identity from it. We fall into a pattern or a habit, a way of viewing ourselves and the other person. And so this becomes part of our mental makeup, something we identify with. Because really, anything we identify with, it builds a sense of ego. I am a man, I am a woman, I am this, I am that, I'm a Buddhist, whatever it is. Some of them are good things, actually, to identify. Many aren't. This is not one of them. And also, when it's our rubbish, we want to revenge. We want to get even with a person. This is actually the motivation often for holding on to rubbish, because we want to get even, get back at that person. And of course it's coming from this sense of me and I that's been hurt. They've done this to me. It's taking life very personally, taking things that people say and do very personally, instead of realising, even though it sounds a bit strange, it's their problem. It's where they're coming from, what they've said, what they've done. That's their kilesa. I don't have to buy into it. It's their conditioning, their habit, their perception. So if we can leave it at that and just see, and we're the same, we have our own perceptions, habits and conditioning as well. But so this can help us actually step back. If we can see it's just their habit, it's their point of view, and not to take it personally. And as I mentioned the last few days, I saw a wonderful book at Mr. Sagra's, from Ajahn Nissarano, lovely title, and it says, don't take your life personally, don't take your life. That's wonderful, isn't it? And people say, oh, how can you say that? Of course it's personal. But when we don't take life personally, we can look at it in terms of Dhamma, because Dhamma is not a personal thing. The practice of the path is actually turning our minds into Dhamma. And so we are stepping back, we're understanding the illusion of self more and more. And when we do that, we see the universality of our experience, everybody's experience. It's the same. It's, there are variations. Some people have a lot more dukkha, this sort of dukkha than that dukkha, and so forth. So it encourages, when we don't take things personally, to really see Dhamma. Because Dhamma is universal. It's true anytime, any place. And of course, when we see other people's rubbish, we just think, wow, it's silly, it's trivial, maybe even think it's childish. But with our rubbish, we don't think that. We think this is serious. So, and of course, forgiveness is something we really need to do, not once a week. Well, it'd be good if we did it once a week, wouldn't it? I think, if when we put the rubbish out once a week, whenever that is, if we could also put out the mental rubbish bin, to let go of all that stuff. And as I say, to realise it's not for my benefit and well-being, not for anybody's benefit and well-being. So if we can do that, we can develop this mental hygiene of forgiveness. And the essence of forgiveness is very, very simple. It's twofold, of course, is to ask for forgiveness. So we can ask, please forgive me. This can ask this of yourself, actually. Please forgive me for anything I did or said, if it's ourselves or thought, that hurt you or upset you. You know, that's the essence of asking forgiveness. And you'd probably be well aware that we in Buddhism, we ask forgiveness, don't we, from Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, very often. And it's fairly similar to this. We usually say, we ask forgiveness for anything you've done through the three doors, you know, dvaratena, like the body, the speech and the mind. We ask forgiveness from the Buddha. And for monks and nuns, you know, when we do our fortnightly Patimokkha we do confession as well. And it's very similar, and we ask for forgiveness. So this is where you see forgiveness in Buddhism. It's a very practical thing for moving the mind on, letting go. And the other part of, we ask for forgiveness, but we have to give forgiveness too. If we don't forgive it, it's only half the equation then. And so we say to the other person, or even to ourselves, I forgive you for anything you did or said that hurt me or upset me. And that's very, very useful. I mean, very simple. You can make it more elaborate. I mean, I have at different times said, you know, I forgive you for anything you did or said that you failed to do or say that hurt me or upset me intentionally or unintentionally. Because it's important to realise a lot of those hurts, a lot of those things people do and say that really wound us, they didn't really intend it that way. We took it that way, but maybe they didn't intend it that way. But one of the things that I was going to, because you have to bring Ajahn Brahmi now. he's got a very nice formula for forgiveness. It works very well in Australia because it's called the AFL. And it's very clever. I mean, he's incredibly clever and witty and quick-minded and wise. It stands for Australian Football League, AFL. And in Australia, this is Australian football, not the English football where you see on TV probably a lot. You know, it's a cross between that and rugby, really, isn't it? You know, a different shaped ball. And it's very, very popular in Australia. So it's a very easy method to practice to remind us how to forgive. And so the AFL, he's redefined it. It's accept, forgive, and learn. But sometimes he changes it. He's very creative. Acknowledge, forgive, and let go. So that they actually are fairly similar in many ways. They have qualities that overlap. And Ayya Khenma, who was one of my teachers, very important teachers actually, was acknowledge, no blame, change. No blame is good, isn't it? Because, you know, we tend to blame ourselves a lot. We can't forgive ourselves. So acknowledge, no blame, forgive. So this first part, the A of AFL, accept or acknowledge, this is actually the most important part in a way. Because once we arrive at acceptance, once we accept a situation for what it is, forgiveness is very easy. Because acceptance, we've understood the situation. Then it's easy to forgive. Easy then after that to let go or learn. So this is where we really need to use our wisdom faculty actually. So now I'm going to talk about those things that help us accept. And the first step of acceptance is to acknowledge that what happened has happened. It's finished. That it doesn't necessarily mean we agree with something. When we acknowledge it, we accept it. Because sometimes people will think, well, if you accept, you know, abuse of any type, it's like saying yes to it's okay. You know, but it isn't that. And again, it's that quotation I mentioned early on that we cannot change what happened. It's happened. But we can change how we relate to it. And so this is a very important part, is to see the anicca in our experience. You know, that once something has happened, It's finished, it's over, it's done. And, I think of one teacher, it's Byron Katie actually, she says, if someone, hits her, they only hit her once. She said after that, they don't hit her. She said the hitting's finished, the assault, the abuse is finished. And she doesn't think about it, she doesn't go on about it. Because, you hear Ajahn Brahm's example, somebody says something to us, really cutting. And then we say, how dare they say that to us? And they repeat the thought, they called me a fool. And then they say, they can't call me a fool. And then we go on and on. We're calling ourselves, we were called a fool once, we call ourselves fools many, many times. So we are continuing that hurt. We're not letting it just be finished. We're not realising that as a Nietzsche, that person was like that because of causes and conditions. Maybe they're tired, angry, they had a bad day, or they had an argument, whatever. And they won't always be like that, hopefully. Otherwise their lives will be miserable. And there are many ways that can help us to accept things. I'd like to mention the classic, it's good to mention actually, Venerable Sariputta's advice for removing resentment. Removing resentment is another word for forgiving, isn't it? Letting go of negative mind states. And he said there are 5 ways to remove, to let go of arisen resentment. And he said the first one, and this is actually a very big part of forgiveness, is loving kindness. Maitri can really forgive. Because if Maitri, if we can develop it in an unbounded sense, we can even give Maitri, if it really gets strong, the Maitri really gets strong, we can even forgive people, we can even extend Maitri to people who we think have done unforgivable things. But most of us can't get that Maitri to that degree, but it will do that, it will allow us to forgive. And the Venerable Sariputta says the other way we can do it is to remove resentment, is to develop compassion. That's an excellent way actually. I think it's much easier than Maitri, because compassion sees that this person who's caused me grief, who's caused me suffering, who I think is unforgivable, is suffering. I mean, why else would they, behave like that? Why else would they say these things unless they were very unhappy? And so compassion is a much easier way to forgive. Maitri is wishing all beings to be happy and well, that friendship, that warmth, just what we wish for ourselves. And that's quite hard for somebody who, you can't forgive, you have a real grudge against, that's very difficult. But compassion, if we can get an inkling, yes, there's suffering, then we can let go and forgive. And the third way that the Venerable Sariputta recommends equanimity. Equanimity, not reacting to it, realising that this person, they're behaving as they are due to causes and conditions. Basically you realise, is their problem? If I don't forgive them, if I react negatively to it, my problem then. So there's 2 problems. So equanimity is seeing things in a very balanced way. It's not going to go towards the extremes of anger, wanting revenge and all those things. So equanimity is very, very useful all the time. And equanimity has that wisdom in it that realises that this situation is because of conditions, and we may or may not understand all the conditions. And the fourth way Venerable Sariputta recommends removing resentment or forgiving, this is an interesting one, he says one should pay no attention to the person who's caused the resentment. And this is very similar to how the Buddha talks about how to deal with negative thoughts in meditation. So we ignore them. So if you have a big problem with somebody, then we don't have a close association with them. ignoring them is probably not quite the right word, because often you do that, it's like a red flag to a bull, and just get them really angry. But we don't have to seek out closeness to a person we can't really deal with at this moment. It's easier to feel loving kindness for somebody that's further away than somebody who's really in your face, as they say. So this is important. So that's often a way, avoidance maybe you say, but you don't make it so obvious to that person that you're avoiding them, but you just don't get involved with them, don't get caught up with the situation. And one of the fifth one is actually a very important one, because this works in terms of wisdom very much, and it's actually often part of equanimity too, but he separated it here. One should apply the idea of the ownership of karma, to the person one resents. Thus, this venerable, this is a monk or nun, this venerable one is the owner of his karma, the heir of his karma. He has karma as his origin, karma as his relative, karma as his resort. He will be the heir of any karma he does, good or bad. This way one should remove the resentment towards that person. And that's one of the best ways, I think, because, when somebody is saying very negative things or doing very negative things, if we realise, we realise they're making such bad karma, they will experience the result of that. When you have that understanding, then compassion comes up, not so much, you don't react so much. When you realise that, yes, you think, yes, that it's bad enough they're doing that. Now, if I react, if I say something back, if I do something negative, then I'm the owner of my karma that I've created. So this is to me a very useful way to see things, actually, in terms of karma that people are making. And it allows us to let go, actually, a lot. And in the contemplation that I'll do later, one of the most important ways to be able to let go or to forgive is just to remember what it feels like when we have a grudge or resentment. It feels awful. It really, when we hang on to it, we feel dreadful. How dare they do this to us? How can they do this? I thought they were a Buddhist. I thought they were this or that. So, very important, get in contact with this feeling of a grudge, this feeling, this is unforgivable, this is unacceptable. Of course, it probably is unacceptable, but get in contact with it, because when we really see the nature of a grudge or resentment, it's very obvious, this is a very unpleasant negative emotion, it's akusala, and then it makes it much easier, it's dukkha, isn't it, it's dukkha. Then we can move away from it, because everyone tends to move away from dukkha, be it mental or physical dukkha. So what does it feel like is very useful? We can feel it in terms of it's like a weight. It's so heavy. It's so we feel very hurtful, angry. Feel trapped, imprisoned. Many negative emotions. And this should be a warning sign to us. Akusala, akusala, unwholesome. And then we can actually see, this does feel like rubbish. This does feel like kunu. But the big question we have to ask ourselves, do I want to be free from it? Do I want to be free from this hurt? Do I want to be free from being a victim? Do I want to be free from the past? It's the past, but it's always about the past. And so we have to ask ourselves if we want to do that. And as I said, when we realise, yes, this is akusala. It's not for my happiness and well-being. It's harmful. It leads to negative consequences. And this is, once we see something as being harmful, it's much easier to give it up, actually. Much easier to think, well, forget it. I don't care. It's my rubbish. It feels so bad. I'm going to let go of it. And also very important one of the things, it's part of karma really, is to realise that we are all of a very conditioned, habitual nature. the things that come up for us, things that come up for other people, are the things that we have repeated again and again. And often these things coming from greed, hatred and delusion, the three unwholesome roots, the akusala mula. And so we can see that with ourselves, and we can see that other people, and with ourselves and other people, that sometimes we are actually cultivating, this is bhavana, akusala states of mind, akusala actions, akusala speech, unwholesome speech, actions and thoughts, experiences in the mind. So this actually can help us, because we realise, that someone who is, say, abusing us in whatever way, they're coming from some conditioning, negative conditioning that is empowering this, giving this, making this seem like something that they have to do. And when we have that understanding of the conditioned nature of people's, of our people, what people do, say and think, ourselves included, we can be a lot more forgiving, a lot more compassionate. Because, if one could put oneself in the place of the other person, and experience what they think, what they feel, what they do and say as a consequence of a very natural outcome, couldn't be any different, given those conditions. And when we understand that, we have that wisdom that they are conditioned, we're conditioned. But we don't have to buy into their conditioning. This is the important thing. It sort of relates to karma. That's their karma. We don't have to create negative karma for ourselves. And when we do this, we have choice. Give ourselves some freedom. When we realise we're conditioned, it actually makes us aware. Right. I'll be careful. And maybe I can have a choice not to say what I would automatically say when somebody calls me an idiot. Say, how dare you call me an idiot? You're an idiot. That's what people usually say, isn't it? Same thing. So a big part of it is conditioning, and it's habits. It's part of karma, really. And one of the things that helps us very, very much in accepting, we're only on accepting at the moment, is to have role models, people who have forgiven the unforgivable. And as I mentioned, I just mentioned her briefly again, this woman, Eva Kaur, that I quoted, that we can't change the past, but we can change how we relate to it. She forgave the Nazis for what they did in the concentration camps. What they did was kill her whole family and use herself and her identical sister, twins, as medical experiments. And she could forgive that. Most concentration camp survivors couldn't, but she was pretty incredible. And she said, one of the things that I found, and I'll just mention it briefly because we're getting close to the end of the time. Well, this is a good quote too. She says lots of good things, actually. Forgiveness is an act of self-healing, self-liberation, self-empowerment. And, that's what she realised, actually, that she had the power to forgive. She said, but when I discovered for myself, what I discovered for myself when she forgave the Nazis was, I discovered that I had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power, and no one could take it away. It was mine to use in any way I wished. So the idea of forgiveness as power is interesting, isn't it? Because often people think, it's weakness. You're forgiving this terrible person, this terrible abuse. And maybe the last quote, this is a very powerful one from her, actually. I like it very much. She says, I forgave the Nazis not because they deserve it, I mentioned it last night, but because I deserve it. And she said, the day I forgave the Nazis privately, I forgave my parents. My parents were gassed in the concentration camp, whom I hated all my life for not having saved me from Auschwitz. They couldn't. They couldn't save her. So it's a bit unfair. But she says, children expect their parents to protect them. Mine couldn't. And then this is a very human addition, she says, and then I forgave myself for hating my parents. Wonderful, isn't it? It's just She's not a Buddhist, I don't think, but she's very, very in tune with things. So, when we see these lived examples, we think, wow, maybe I can forgive this person who's said this, done this, usually not as bad as what she experienced. So this is ways to develop acceptance. And as I say, often it usually comes from wisdom, from understanding things as they are. And of course, one of the things that enables us to forgive is to have death in mind, keep Maranasati in mind. It puts everything into perspective. And the Buddha, I mentioned this quote last night, but this is a proper quote, the full quote, from the Dhammapada, the Yamaka Wagga. There are those who do not realise that one day we all must die. There are. Well, I think they realise, but they ignore it. But those who realise this settle their quarrels. They forgive. They, put things in the past and let go. And of course, life, when you realise that, life is, as I mentioned last night, a limited offer, you make the best of it. We don't want to hold on to the rubbish. We want to do the best with our life because we know it's not forever. It's this life. And for us, the most important things then is to do something, the things that make us happy, that we can contribute to other people's happiness, to do good. These sorts of things are the things that become more valuable. The hanging on to resentments and so on, once we think in terms of death, they drop off the list. We can let go of them. So this is very useful. So there are many other ways we can, yes, that's very good. When we can't forgive, we can think, very good question, am I perfect? Because if we realise, wow, no, I'm not perfect, then we may be able to allow that other people are imperfect too, so it helps. And one of the other things that Ajahn Brahm mentions this, but I think the Buddha does too, that when people, particularly when they're angry or they're very negative through their speech and their actions, they're actually like a mad person or someone who's sick. So Ajahn Brahm says, when you see someone who's really angry with you, for instance, you can think, they're like a terminal cancer patient. They've got this real illness, and so that's quite a useful thing. That's a temporary insanity. I mentioned that. So the forgiveness, as I say, that comes very naturally once you accept. You've got a sense of acceptance. It comes very naturally, and then we can use those words of forgiveness, as I mentioned. Please forgive me for anything that I did or said that hurt or upset you. That's fine. And we have, kayena vacca cittena pamanena maya katam rachayan kamame bante bhuri panya tathagata. That's very nice. So we're encouraged to forgive. But the important thing too, so we have Ajahn Brahm's accept or acknowledge, or Ayakina's acknowledge, and then we had forgive, and that's a natural consequence. Once we understand the situation, the natural consequence is we can forgive, actually. And then we can learn or let go. That's the AFL. And what we learn when we let go is that, wow, we feel much better, we feel much lighter, we feel much happier, we feel much healthier sometimes too, mentally at least, perhaps even physically. And once we see the benefit in forgiveness, we can do it much, much more, because we think, wow, it was useful. And actually I mentioned here that it's not a good thing to do last thing at night, because if one's not successful, one probably won't sleep. You think, oh, they did this. But it's good every day or frequently to forgive the negative things that people have done, out of a sense of compassion, understanding karma, their foolishness in doing or saying something, akusala. This can be very useful. So I'd like to finish there, a little bit over time, but as I say, I think this is a very useful thing if we can develop this ability to forgive. And it's a bit like, Ajahn Brahm calls the Teflon mind, this forgiveness. Things don't stick with us. We can let go of them. There's a Nalya in the 4 ways of letting go of tanha. So lack of forgiveness is like a negative tanha, actually. We can't forgive. So I hope this gives you an idea and gives you the background for the meditation, contemplation we'll do in a short time. So now is the time for a cup of tea, and maybe I've got the